Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to be talking about a box set, Spine 203, the BRD Trilogy. Now these are three films where they were all directed by Rainer Werner Fassbinder. Fassbinder was considered one of the key figures of the new German cinema. This is the German equivalent of the French New Wave, except it happened much later, and taking a cue with what was going on in European cinema, beginning from the end of the First War with Italian neorealism, and then the next major movement was the French New Wave, and then there were the movies that sprung off from the 70s, and New German cinema was one of them. Fassbinder is one of the key figures of this. Others include Volker Schoendorf and Werner Herzog also came from this. Arguably, Wim Wenders can be considered part of this, although he also continued on a little bit after that wave of the movement. It's been argued that Fassbinder's sudden death in 1982 marked the end of the new German cinema. Now, Fassbinder was the most interesting of the directors because he was insanely, I would probably even say obscenely prolific. What was it? He had a career that lasted 15 years or so, and in that time he made 40 feature films, and plus what can be arguably considered his magnum opus, the 15 hour, depending on how you watch it, depending on which country you watch it, Berlin Alexanderplatz. So this is a guy where getting into his filmography is a little bit of a tall order. In fact, for myself, my only experience with Fassbinder has been with the BRD Trilogy, in the Year of 13 Moons, and Berlin Alexanderplatz. And I'm kind of dreading the day when I have to review that one, because I have no idea how I'm going to tackle that one. Boy, oh boy. Anyways, so the BRD Trilogy was a project that Fassbinder initiated can't imagine his workload, good grief. And also he was able to get into some other things that made him infamous as well. He was kind of known as a libertine. In fact, he died of a heart attack, and it was caused by a lethal mixture of cocaine and sleeping pills. So, yeah, you can imagine. So yeah, he's one of those guys. If film directors were rock stars, that's basically Fassbinder. But anyways, this was intended to be an ongoing project he wanted to do a series of films about post-war Germany, and all in the name of kind of being able to provide a means of for Germany to look at itself. In fact, this is one of his big things, and something that I picked up in several of his films, is the need for reflexivity, and especially when it comes to history and society. And he felt that Germany never really did that, and so this was his means of doing so. And one of the things that defines Fassbinder is he's like plenty of filmmakers, he was aware of a long past history, and he can cite lots of influence. But the influence that really made an impression on him, and it's because he actually wrote a essay kind of a tribute to him, was Douglas Sirk. We talked about him with All That Heaven Allows. And actually he focuses that period of Sirk's career where he doesn't look at when he was in UFA. making, which was the film company that was around during the Third Reich. He doesn't focus on that. He focuses on when Cirque came to America and started working for Universal. Again, All That Heaven Allows, Magnificent Obsession, Written on the Wind, Imitation of Life, and so those films. And the thing that he learned from Cirque was that Cirque, what makes those films interesting is that while they follow a conventional genre, and they play to the conventional genre, he was able to do more to it that gives it a little bit more of an edge and intrigue. In other words, to go beyond the conventions in a very, very subtle way. I've talked about this when discussing All That Heaven Allows, and Fassbinder took this and ran with it for many of his films. I mean, it's not just, and this trilogy is probably the most potent example. Now, again, I haven't gone through all his filmography. Even with tackling Berlin Alexanderplatz, I still haven't tackled all of his films, but I'm pretty sure that most, if not all of them, follow that same idea, that sort of Circean idea of playing to conventions and using those conventions to be able to do more. And once again, I think the BRD Trilogy is probably the most potent example and a good single example to go into. If you don't care to go into his whole filmography, or if you don't have the time, or whatever it is, it's a really good introduction. In fact, it was the introduction to Fassbinder for me. Was this? So he intended it to be a series. I don't know how many films he probably would have done more, but because of its death, it's capped off at 3, and thus it became BRD Trilogy. BRD, of course, is the German acronym Bundesrepublik Deutschland, Federal Republic of Germany. So here we have 3 films. The first one is The Marriage of Maria Braun. Now, the story here, it begins near the end of World War II, and Maria is getting married to Hermann Braun, who is also a Wehrmacht soldier. In fact, they're in the registry building as it's being shelled and destroyed and so forth as they're getting married. And because of all that was going on, he eventually gets called in for duty, and basically their marriage only lasts for half a day and a full night, according to them. But even with that separation, she still is very loyal through this period. And the first thing she has to go through is immediately after the war, when Germany was divided into 4 zones, occupied by the 4 major Allied powers, and thus these are war ruins. This is black market. This is the kind of thing when I'll get to Germany year 0, it's going to be full of. Also, The Third Man, although the Third Man takes place in Vienna, but it's that kind of idea. So she has to deal with that, and she learns very early on about the nature of trade, and her mission is to try to live as well as she can, especially for her husband, whom she anticipates coming back. Well, at one point, she finds out that her husband was presumed dead, and so she's grief-stricken by this, but she also uses this as an opportunity to get close to an American soldier, and in fact, she gets pregnant by him, and then one day he shows up, and there's a murder going on, kind of by her hands, but he decides to take the blame for it, so he's put in prison. So again, this creates another separation. So she has to kind of fend for herself. And what she ends up doing, she ends up befriending a textile businessman, and she serves as a not only a translator, because she actually through the affair, the tryst with the American soldier, she learns English, and so thus she serves as a translator and a kind of business advisor, and helps the business get up and running. And this is during the time when, after the American, British, and French sectors of Germany joined together to form the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, and then the lone Soviet sector then becomes the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, DDR, East Germany. During the 50s was the time of the economic miracle, when suddenly, after becoming a republic and kind of asserting itself, getting itself back on its feet, in large part due to the Marshall Plan, was a big contributing factor. They suddenly became a rising economic powerhouse, certainly for Europe, and she rides on the wave. In fact, at one point she calls herself the Matahari of the economic miracle, because she plays on the producer sides, increasing production, but she's also uses that to help the workers, in her words. But all of this is done to build a home for her husband, who's still in prison for this. And it's all of these wheelings and dealings she does. Now, the whole thing is, and I'm not going to give away the ending of what happens. It's a very messy affair, or it's a very interesting affair that unfolds. But this whole thing is a really good example of what Fassbinder wanted to do, particularly with these BRD films. That this film is really, I call it an allegorical melodrama, where the story itself and the way it all the various twists and turns. I mean, the twists and turns is one of the things that characterizes a melodrama, and she herself is a very melodramatic character. She has her motivations for a lot of what she does is very, it's single-minded and very, very focused and very particular. So the whole story plays out like a melodrama, but it's played within this particular period in German history, beginning with the end of World War II, and then it ends with Germany winning the World Cup in 1962, I believe. I could be wrong on the year, so forgive me, football fans, if I screwed up on that one. And so it's a melodrama that has an allegorical function, and in this case, and Maria Braun, in addition to being a melodramatic character, she serves as a kind of cipher for a Germany that wants to move forward, but does so at the expense of any kind of introspection or contemplation about its past. Now, did Germany really, really do this? Not entirely. There were definitely people, certainly on the artistic scene, that wanted to raise as much awareness as possible. One example that comes to mind is Peter Weiss. Although I think he's actually from, I forget if he was born in Germany. Anyways, but the reason I mentioned Peter Weiss is because one of the plays he did was called The Investigation, and this was written right after the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials, where instead of having a war crimes tribunal trying everyone, it's now West Germany trying its own, and it uses its own German penal code to do so. And this, obviously, they wouldn't get the upper echelons. These would be more the middlemen. Instead of the commandant of Auschwitz, it's the adjutant. The highest ranking official who was charged in that trial was the adjutant to Auschwitz. So someone who worked directly under Rudolf Höss. Maluka, and then several others. Anyways, so the investigation was created in the wake of that trial, and that was probably the most famous, certainly worldwide, example of Germany trying to reconcile its own past. So, but Fassbinder felt like that was not enough. And one of the things that I got in watching The Marriage of Maria Braun was that one of the first things she does is she understands how trade works, that you exchange goods to try to advance yourself. Now, this is at the heart of economic activity. This has certainly been the basis of civilization. And I get the feeling that what Fassbinder is trying to say is that in a situation where you're literally leveled to the ground, and there's no better leveling than World War II, everybody's starting from year zero, again, Germany year zero, you would think that would be the opportunity to start again. Well, I think his notion was that from the ashes the same demons arise, and that you not only do they come back, but they build a new system again, and then you end up having the same sort of problems. I think that's what he wanted to explore through these films, is how Germany moving forward is really just doing the same thing over and over again, and it's just only a matter of time before, I guess his thinking is that before something else happens. Maybe not as dramatic as the Third Reich, but maybe something just as bad as the last go around. So, and what he wanted to do was to make films that would make that point, and he felt like that's why he drew a lot from Douglas Sirk. He got that from Sirk. He got that notion of using a conventional film, or using conventional film genres to make other points, and to have characters stand in for particular ideas. So they serve allegorical functions. So you definitely get that from The Marriage of Maria Braun. Now, the other thing I picked up in watching this again is the motivator for this. It's all because of her marriage, which again lasted for really, which lasted for essentially a day. Or I should say that the time that they were together, and there was nothing that impeded them, that kept them apart. It only lasted for a day. But throughout this whole time, she's still loyal, intensely loyal to her husband. And the first time you see him, he's wearing a Wehrmacht uniform. So so pick up the symbolism there from that. So yeah. At any rate, so that's The Marriage of Maria Braun. Now, this is where I have to explain a little bit about the order of films. Now, there's a slight there can be two different orders to these films. There's the order of presentation, which would have, or the order of its theatrical release, which would be Maria Braun, then Lola, then Veronika Voss. But the films have designations. Actually, Lola and Veronika Voss have this, where it's BRD2 for Veronika Voss and BRD3 Lola. In other words, this is the order in which they were written. And the way that Criterion decides to puts it in order of written. So the next film is Veronika Voss, which was technically theatrically released after Lola. Some people like to reverse it, but that's the way I watched it. I watched it in that order. I know about it the other ways. Some people pointed out that actually it's better to watch it in theatrical order rather than in written order. Oh, and the other difference is that it's also that order is also chronological in terms of its storylines. Maria Braun being the earliest story, and then Veronika Voss, and then Lola. which is, again, that's why Fassbinder anticipated a series of films, because he wanted to go through more periods. He probably would have stopped at the 70s, because that's actually when he got his start. Anyways, but who knows? Probably would have kept going. But anyways, it didn't stop him from making 40 feature films. Anyways, so Veronika Voss is actually two things. One, it's a kind of loose, I don't want to call it a remake, but it definitely owes a lot to Sunset Boulevard, directed by Billy Wilder. But it's also largely based, and he actually said this from the beginning, it's largely based on the life, and actually the declining career and life, of Sybil Schmidt, who was an actress who started out in the 20s and then was signed to UFA in the 30s, continued to work on UFA through the 30s and 40s, and so therefore she's one of those actresses that gets associated with the Third Reich. In fact, she was the love interest in Titanic 1943. So there you go. See, it all connects. But obviously after the war, she didn't get a whole lot of work because of her associations with UFA, and this is the kind of story that is made for Behind the Music. It's you know, her career gets in a standstill. She gets addicted to a lot of opiates and alcohol. I think for Schmidt it was both. It was both alcohol and opiates. I know in Veronika Voss she has that. Obviously, Veronika Voss is the stand-in for Sybil Schmidt. But anyways, and so that addiction it causes her undoing, and whatever money she makes fuels this habit and gets siphoned off until she dies. I forget if it was an actual suicide or drug induced or whatnot. But anyways, so Veronika Voss is basically that, and that's kind of how it was constructed. It was just a dramatized retelling of Sybil Schmidt's life, and I would say that in that context, it kind of, I mean, it's one way of dealing with your past is, you know, letting themselves be killed off. But this is the one that while it is part of the trilogy, it doesn't, the other two films, Maria Braun and Lola, I'm going to go into, really, I think, fit the idea really well. This one, I'm not entirely sure how it works, and I think mainly because it's so unique in the trilogy. For starters, the cinematography, it's shot in black and white, and by black and white, I'm talking high contrast black and white. You know, the whites are white, the blacks are blacks. It's just very, very, very. It's actually I've read this somewhere. It's actually a really good example of reverse film noir, where a lot of the seedy actions are done in the light instead of dark. Usually with film noir, we associate seedy actions with a lot of shadow. But here, a lot of it takes place under a lot of bright lights and so on. So yeah, the cinematography makes it stand out. And I think the way that the story plays out, and I think it makes much more sense if you know it going into it, that this is really just a dramatized version of what happened to Sybil Schmidt. And again, it also owes something to Sunset Boulevard as well. But at any rate, so there's that. And then finally, BRD number 3 is Lola. Oh yeah, the other characteristic that defines all of them, as you can see, these are all. This is the history of Western Germany after World War II, all told through women. So that's the unifying theme. So anyways, so here we have Lola. And Lola is in large part a very loose remake of The Blue Angel. I have yet to see The Blue Angel, but I know what the story is. It's basically a high-minded, idealistic teacher falls in love with a cabaret singer, and yes, this is the film that launched Marlene Dietrich. It also started that one of those famous director-actor collaborations, Josef von Sternberg and Marlene Dietrich. Anyways, so yeah, this teacher falls in love with the cabaret singer, and it's his undoing. He basically falls from a lower position, and he degrades himself. He ends up degrading himself, and it's all very tragic and everything. So it is a loose remake of that, except now the setting is in the 1950s, and it's in this one German town, and instead of a high-minded or idealistic teacher, you have a high-minded, idealistic, or somewhat more pragmatic than idealist, although that takes an interesting turn, building commissioner. And the cabaret singer, you now go full-on vaudeville whorehouse. And in fact, Lola is the private whore of the business tycoon the major building contractor that pretty much owns the town, and likewise owns her. And if Maria Braun is an allegorical melodrama, this is an allegorical comedy, and it does. Well, I don't think The Blue Angel is necessarily a comedy of remarriage, and actually this is what makes it interesting as a remake, as it were. It's on the one hand it follows more of a comedy of remarriage affair in the story, but there's also a lot of undercutting with it. And probably the biggest one is, I don't want to give too much away, but basically the biggest undercut is who's the true hero and who really wins out. And on the one hand, there is kind of a victory, but on the other hand, if you think about what that victory means and what it took to get to that, it leaves you with a very, very bitter taste. It's not even bittersweet, it's very bitter. Which, again, I think is a very Circean thing. Going back to All That Heaven Allows, yes, it's a melodramatic love story, but there's a lot of bitterness in it. In fact, the last shot it's not you would expect it to be the couple standing up, after the misunderstanding, they're holding each other's arms and it's a full-on kiss. But no, that's not how All That Heaven Allows ends. The guy's lying down on his couch. I won't tell you how he got to that state, but it's far from heroic or far from any kind of triumphant. There's no triumphant heroism, and it's no different in Lola as well. And actually, that's something I kind of alluded to with the cinematography. The other thing that actually distinguishes each of these films is the cinematography. I mentioned Veronika Voss with its high contrast black and white cinematography. Maria Braun used a lot of, it feels very, very desaturated. I think, again, fitting with the melodrama. In Lola, it owes a lot to Technicolor films. And in fact, the cinematographer, Xavier Schwartzberger, and Fassbinder watched several Technicolor films to kind of get an idea of how to do it. And this is where there's a lot of very colorful lights, very strong, bold colors. I'm sure there's a lot of... Actually, if they studied MGM, I'm pretty sure they studied the Technicolor films that MGM did. And the thing that characterized that was, if you've ever noticed that there's some Technicolor films that have a sort of a glossy look, it's because of the filters that MGM used. And I know this is because this was actually the same set of filters that was employed for Stanley Kubrick's Lolita. because what he wanted as far as a look, he wanted that sort of glossy MGM picture look, and he was able to do that because his cinematographer was able to get these filters that MGM used, and therefore used it in Lolita. Another L. Another L to femme fatale, too. So yeah, I know I was kind of vague about it. I mean, it is something that you kind of have to see in order to get, but hopefully that will prepare you a bit. Now, unfortunately, this isn't another out-of-print title, but it has nothing to do with Studio Canal. In fact, the copyright holders for all of Fassbinder's work is the Fassbinder Foundation. And I believe the reason why, part of it was the company that held the rights to 2 of the films was no longer in existence, and so there was kind of a dispute about, okay, who's going to get what. But I think they're also preparing for a reissue. I don't know when. The only way I kind of know about this is because of digging around some forums, particularly CriterionForum.org. Somebody mentioned, actually somebody wrote a letter to Criterion asking, when is this set going to come back in print? It's like, oh, we're preparing a reissue, so this will be not only reissued on DVD but also on Blu-ray. So that might be happening. I think the transfers could have been. There was some controversy, some mild controversy on the quality of the transfers, particularly with the aspect ratios. But maybe this will be all resolved and everything. And plus, this came out in 2003, and while I mean, and actually, as I'm going through all of these sequentially, I'm noticing an ever so gradual increase in quality as far as the transfers and looks and everything. So for something that came out 10 years ago, it still is pretty good, but also a lot has changed since then, and I'm sure they might go back and reconsider some things and so forth. Hopefully, all done with good taste. And it's the kind of mistakes they make, and actually no, the kind of mistakes they make are really just more done in hindsight. It was one of those, oh, if only we knew that at the time. So it was not deliberate. Well, I wouldn't accuse a lot of it of deliberate. Don't attribute to malice what you can attribute to ignorance, using Hanlon's razor. But anyways, so hopefully that will come out again. So I would say that well, again, it's an introduction to Fassbinder. If you want to know what he was like as a director, it really is like a good way to get into what it is all about. There's other films of his that I want to see. I want to see Rolled on a Wire, which was his only sci-fi film that he did. And that ended up being it was based on a pulp sci-fi novel, and it turned into a 3-hour thing. So, like Kubrick, he can take something really, really small and make it big. And then, I already mentioned Berlin Alexanderplatz. And I also am interested in seeing Ali Fear Eats the Soul, because that was his direct remake of All That Heaven Allows. Setting and circumstances modified, but basically it follows the same storyline. So I'll be curious about that. But anyway, so it's a good introduction to Fassbinder, and particularly his Cirque tendencies, where he uses a particular film convention and uses it to do more. And in that sense, and actually, this is probably something I really want to. I guess I can do this now, a little bit. I'm not totally against remakes. I mean, I understand why remakes happen and why they do happen. But my take on remakes is that I will champion a remake if you feel like you can add something to the original, if you can build upon it, or take it in a slightly different context and have a new spin on it. what I don't like are useless remakes, or where it's obvious that you're just remaking it because it's a popular title and you want it as a quick cash in. So, you know, Lola being a remake of The Blue Angel, that makes sense. And there are actually plenty of... Actually, there is a film that I'm going to get into in the near future that's actually a really good example of this, of a film that can be thought of as a remake, but really does add something to the original. But so those I would consider to be good remakes. Wanting to remake, like some of the remake films I've heard about that are still in the works. I don't know if it's going to actually happen. Film titles like The Neverending Story and Videodrome. Like, why? Why do you need to do that? I mean, they were already good as they are. I mean, okay, Neverending Story I can kind of understand, but Videodrome? Why would you want to make that? I mean, considering that it was released, God, 30 years ago, it still is quite... I mean, it's amazing how still eerily relevant it is. So why do you need to do that again, really? Yes, that's another title that's going to be coming in the near future here. So, at any rate, so Lola's a good example of a good remake, and because it takes the basic story, but then it also it sets it in a different context, and also is able to do a little bit more to it. It puts a little bit puts a new spin on the story and the characters and so on. So yeah, the BRD Trilogy. And until next time, take care.